days of Halloween.
October is the month where everyone seems to be seeing and hearing things that make them question as to whether or not they actually happened. As the veil is lifted and the spirits roam the earth, it can make believers out of the most skeptical. Maybe like most of the people in these stories, you'll be a believer too. Enjoy. When I was 5, I woke up from my sleep and saw a man sitting on the stairs watching me. And I wasn't scared though. There was something tranquil about it. I just watched him, and he watched me, for what seemed like 10 minutes. Then, all of a sudden, he was gone. A few days later, I found out my dad was killed in Europe. I live in Canada, and my parents were separated. There's pictures of me with him when I was just born, but he left shortly after that. To this day, that is the only memory that I have of my dad, a ghost watching over me. I don't believe in ghosts, but I know what I saw. I've never told anyone before, except my mom. I watched a white light hover in the distance between two mountains. Then it moved up, then down. At that point, I called my buddies outside to watch it. We witnessed it move side to side, then in a perfect clockwise circle, then anti-clockwise. Next, it started doing tight figure eights one way, then back the other. We watched them move diagonally to the left, then back to center, diagonally right and back to center. During this, we discussed the possibilities of what it could be. A helicopter, a skilled pilot, a series of spotlights. The speed at which it moved, and the fact that it didn't waver slightly, and the fact that the motion was so fluid, left us without explanation. As we discussed it and watched the movements, the light moved even faster up, down, and diagonally. It then sped off to the right, at a speed we could barely focus on. It was now about 3 kilometers on the other side of the mountain, and then, suddenly it took off straight up, outwards toward the stars, until it was gone. I'm driving my friend home around 2 or 3 in the morning. As we approach her intersection, there's a woman walking along on the right lane of the street that I'm driving along. I'm supposed to be turning right onto my friend's street soon, but I switch out of that lane to avoid her, and my friend and I kind of mentioned that that was weird. One of us suggests maybe she's blind or sleepwalking, and I decide to U-turn around to see if maybe I can help her. But I feel very strange about the entire situation. I stop in the left lane closest to where she is, and roll down the window a peep. Debating on what to say, and she starts walking toward us with her arms forward, almost zombie-like, but more so as if she was trying to feel something. Her eyes looked closed when we first saw her, but now they seemed slightly open, even whitish, and she was sort of smiling. I had an instant body feeling, oh fuck, we gotta go. As one of us says, that is not good energy, and I just bolted out of the intersection and told my friend to sleep over at my place tonight. Still have no idea what this was exactly, and when we mentioned it to my friend's brother, he said he's seen that woman eating soil some while ago across the street from their house during the day. No one knows if she lives in the neighborhood, but she's not an immediate neighbor. Their immediate next-door neighbor has apparently seen a woman, unspecified whether it looked like this one or not, fly across the street. To be fair, he's a total stoner and drinks a lot, but a grown man was scared out of his mind at 2 a.m. and came running to my friend's house telling him this story. From what I recall, she was on his side of the street walking along. He looked away for 1 second, and she was all the way on the other side of the street, like an impossible distance for a few seconds in front of someone's eyes. Another neighbor who's lived in the area since he was a child and is about 50 now has apparently seen this woman every so often, and she's never aged. I want to find out more about this witch-like person, because this all seems insane and very scary, with a lingering bad energy, and it's the closest thing to something paranormal I've ever experienced. My brother lost his wallet and was retracing his steps looking for it. This is when a homeless man approached him at a coffee shop and said to him, "Don't worry, it's in the bathroom sink. Your wallet is in your bathroom sink." Later that night, he did indeed find his wallet at home in the bathroom sink. A few days later, he saw the homeless man and thanked him for his help. The guy became really irritated and told my brother he had never seen him before. When I was about 10 or 11, we were having a get-together at my grandma's house for the holidays. All of us cousins played all day, and when night fell, we played hide-and-seek. While the adults smoked and drank up by the house, we stayed on the back of the property, just having a good time. I was hiding in between a bush and the property fence when I heard the strangest sound. It was almost a scream, both happy and miserable at the same time. I jumped up and kind of shouted. All my cousins heard it, and we all saw it too. An animal on 2 legs, and it ran off with jerky motions. Being the oldest by about 3 years, I calmed down the crying little ones and explained as best I could that it was just someone trying to scare us. I've had nightmares about that sound. In my mind, it seems a grotesque mimicry of our joyous screams and laughter as we played. None of my cousins today will admit to even remembering the incident, although the adults remembered the commotion it caused. Once as a child, my parents took me to a carnival. I was 4 years old, and at the time, an only child. I got in line for one of those rides where you sit inside a plastic dragon and spin the wheel to rotate yourself faster. Climbing into what I assumed was an empty dragon, I was startled to see another girl already waiting for the ride to start. She looked exactly like me. We spun the wheel and stared at each other in silence without blinking for the entire duration of the ride. When it ended, we got mixed up in the shuffle, and my parents started to walk away with this other little girl. I yelled for them to wait, and they turned back to see me 20 feet behind them. They both went ghost white, and when I caught up, my doppelganger was gone. To this day, we never, ever speak of that trip to the carnival. When I was about 13, my family had a Jack Russell, Jack, and a Chow mix, Kuma. The dogs had free rein of our half-acre fenced-in yard. One day I let Jack outside like any other day, but I noticed the trees were filled with crows. The property is surrounded by several large trees, and there must have been hundreds of crows. As I'm in awe with the sheer amount of black death surrounding my home, I realize there is a massive crow on the ground, and Jack is challenging him. growling and circling the bird. He was about 12 pounds, and I was afraid he might get carried away. Then all of a sudden the battle begun. He was biting the crow's wings, and the bird was pecking him, trying to grab him with one foot still on the ground. Crow King gave no shits. All of his hundreds of crow followers were bursting into caws and shrieks, egging on their leader, but never joining in. I, meanwhile, was screaming for my brother, freaking out our dog would be killed. He came running out of the house, screaming for Jack to come in, but that bastard never listened. That's when Kuma came barreling out of the house, straight toward the bird-dog battle arena, grabbed the Crow King by the neck, and shook that fucker with fiery disregard for his onlooking horrified subjects. The Crow King was dead. The skies filled with crows, and the sound was deafening as they all flew away. Hundreds of pissed-off crows all cawing and flapping away. Jack's face was all cut up, but other than that, he was fine. To this day, my older brother and I are the only ones that saw this happen, and no one in my family believes me when I tell them the story of the Crow King and his defeat. I think it was a crow fight club, and they all gathered to send their strongest fighters into battle and bet on the winner. When I was about 10, they started putting missing children on milk cartons. Every morning for a while, I was looking at this boy's face on the side of the milk while I would eat my cereal. Then, one day, a car went down my street while I was playing outside, and there was a boy in the back seat, with his face up close to the window looking out. I'm 99% sure it was the boy from the milk carton. I told my parents, but they never believed me. When I was in the Navy in the mid-2000s, I was in the Western Pacific doing a tour on the USS Kitty Hawk. I was on the night shift at the time, and it was about 2 a.m. There was a storm way off on the horizon, lighting up the skyline something fierce to the port side. I swear to this day that I saw something that had to be about the size of a large skyscraper breaking the water, silhouetted against the horizon. I've heard stories from people who've seen similar things. Only people who have seen similar things have ever come close to believing me. I don't blame anyone for not believing me. It's haunted me for over a decade, and I'll probably never know what it was. I just know there's something out there. I once saw a man dressed as a Confederate soldier walking down my street as I was heading home from work. There was a school bus coming, and he stopped on the other side of the road, as if to let the bus pass before crossing, and I was stopped at the stop sign. We looked at each other, the bus passed, and then he was gone. I went outside early one morning and saw this woman kneeled in my mother's flower garden. I was a little sketched out. I think I was 10, and a person I didn't know was just sitting in the middle of her garden. Not knowing what to do, I just said hello to her. She turned around and immediately apologized for being in our yard, and said that we just had such nice flowers and she couldn't help it. Then she walked away. I thought it was cute, didn't think any more of it, and went about my day. Mom and Dad left to do errands, and my brother and I were home alone. We're both watching TV. Without any warning, someone taps my shoulder behind me. I freak out and turn around, and she is standing right behind my brother and I. She apologized immensely, and then asked where my mom and dad were. I told her they would be back any time, but that she really shouldn't be coming into people's houses. She agreed and asked for a pen and a piece of paper, saying she wanted to write them a note. I complied and told her to do it out in the dining room. I peered from behind a corner in my hallway and never let her out of my sight. I was beyond afraid. She calmly set the pen down, shouted "thank you" from the dining room, and then walked out the front door. I bolted to the window to make sure she was gone, then bolted to the door and locked it. Then I nervously and very slowly approached the note she left on the table. And as I read it, I was dumbfounded. She said that she believed in God, and that he spoke to her in the garden and told her to build an altar to her grandmother. The note was her scheduling an appointment with my mother to discuss placing a tombstone and a prayer table in the garden. My parents got home. I was freaked out. I told them my mom had to talk to this woman. She left her phone number on the note. My mom took the day off work, sat on the porch at the time the woman said, and waited for her to arrive. She never showed up. My mother called the number on the note, only to get a disconnected message. The only proof I had of any of these things happening was the note she left. My mom and dad don't believe most of the story, and it seems my brother forgot about it. But I know it happened. I saw a ball of lightning. It was right after a thunderstorm passed by. I could see floating orbs in the sky. There were a couple of cars parked by an open field, and people were watching this happen. So I parked and got out to join them. We all sort of just looked on in silence until they winked out one by one. There were at least 10 of them, and they seemed to fly together in patterns. Sometimes they were fast. Other times, they slowed down or reversed direction. They seemed small, but I could tell this wasn't because they were far up in the sky. If I were to guess, they'd be about the size of a basketball, maybe a little larger. The whole ordeal only lasted 30 minutes. Then we all got in our cars and left. I tried taking pictures, but it was dark, and the lights were too faint to make out. I wish I would have at least recorded it. Everyone was asleep. My campsite was the only one with a fire lit, and my dad's girlfriend and I were awake. All of a sudden, I hear this terrible scream, with an almost cackle quality to it. Then there was a rustling on the other side of a fence. We had a clear line of sight between the campsite and the fence, and this weird cougar, dog, human-looking thing climbed over the fence with its knees and arms bent at odd angles, and then it was over the fence. It stood up on 2 legs and ran to the left into the campgrounds. It was terrifying. No one has ever believed me, but my dad's now ex-girlfriend still remembers. And looking into the urban legends in Michigan, I came across the story of the Dog Man. When I was about 6, my entire family was helping to build my grandparents' new house. I was helping my dad move really long 2x4s from the lumber pile when a mouse ran out from under the board I had just moved. This was out in the middle of the woods. Mice were no big deal to any of us. I just did a double take because the mouse was blue. And I don't mean the sun reflected off its fur, and it had a blue sheen to it. I mean brilliant royal blue. He was running fast, but I got my dad to see it too, and he agreed that the mouse was really blue. We've told multiple people, my mom included. and no one believes us. But we know what we saw. I grew up in Florida, and I've seen my fair share of weird stuff, but this takes the cake. When I was about 8 or 9, my older brother and I went on a walk in our neighborhood, and at the end of our street that our house was on, we both saw a man in a doctor's coat and a surgical mask, walking very slowly and awkwardly, as if he had a limp, while holding his side like he was injured. Both me and my brother thought this was some weird shit and decided to walk in the opposite direction back home. A couple of years later, I was playing basketball in my driveway and saw what looked like the same man in the doctor's coat and a surgical mask. Except this time, he was riding a unicycle past my house on the road. He didn't look at me. He just kept staring straight ahead at the road, riding his unicycle. And a year after that, I swear I saw the same man riding his unicycle just days before I moved away from that house. Whenever I tell people this now, they kind of give me a weird look and don't really know what to say. It's one of those weird things that's just so obscure to make up, but too ridiculous to think it actually happened. I'm not a superstitious person, so I've completely ruled this out as a strange coincidence. Still, when it comes to things, this series of events is by far the spookiest, and this all happened within the span of 2 weeks last year. First, I was walking home extremely late from work. I worked until about 3 a.m. and had decided I'd take the long walk home that night. Anyway, I took a road that went away from the city and into the woods, so there wouldn't be any cars zipping past as I walked. Next thing I know, I hear a rustle in some trees. I look over and see someone about 20 feet in the bush with a perfectly white blanket set on their head. I froze and looked at them for a moment, then slowly kept walking as I clutched my multi-tool in my pocket and flipped out its knife. After I continued on for a few moments, they simply took off into the woods, and that was that. Gave me the creeps. I pegged it as a homeless guy or a teenager fucking around on drugs. The next night, I decided to walk to the store at around 11:30 p.m. It's a good walk, so I'm not back until around 12:45. I live in a really nice neighborhood, and right next to my apartment is a small convenience store that closes at 11. As I approach my apartment, I see this girl dressed in all white head to toe. White heels, nice short white dress, white fur vest, and a massive white hat. Her hair was blonde, and she even had a long skinny cigarette. She looked like she just left a fancy 30s costume party. She simply stood in this empty convenience store parking lot and paid no attention to me as I passed by. Why she was in the middle of the closed lot I have no idea, but once again, gave me the creeps, especially after the previous night. So I get into work on Monday, tell some people of my strange encounters to spook them out. Everyone tells me to stop walking at night. I decide it's probably a good idea and jokingly say, I don't want to risk running into the third white figure. Ooh. The next Sunday, I realize I'm out of toothpaste, hop in my car, drive to the store. Driving back, I approach a stop sign with a crosswalk. The road is completely empty at this time of night, but I come to a complete stop as I always do. But apparently, I wasn't really paying attention, because the moment I pressed the gas, someone stepped out onto the crosswalk and I quickly hit my brakes. I immediately gesture an apologetic wave to the person, and I realize it's a kid. not just any kid. An albino kid. He didn't seem to notice my mistake and just slowly strolls past my car. I was already a little flustered from my inattentiveness, but for a brief moment as I thought about the two people I had seen before and how I had joked about there being a third, I nearly shit my pants. I was so creeped out. Got home and immediately thought of it all as a coincidence. I had never seen an albino person before, so that made the last one especially shocking to me. But I don't walk at night anymore. I was having a secret smoke one night, and when I was finished, I put the ashtray in my hiding place on top of a high cupboard in my kitchen. Instead of getting on the footstool, I was on my tiptoes and stretching up to put the ashtray up there when I lost my balance and the ashtray slipped out of my fingers and fell to the floor. I ducked out of the way so I didn't get covered in ash or get hit by the heavy glass ashtray, and I heard it hit the ground behind me loudly and then clatter as it rolled. I sighed as I knew I'd have to clean up ash from the floor and was annoyed at myself for being so clumsy. But then when I turned around to where I had heard it land, there was nothing there. I honestly spent about 30 minutes looking all over that kitchen for that ashtray or even a trace of ash on the floor. But there was nothing. It and its contents had simply vanished into thin air. I went to bed completely freaked out that night and had another look the next morning. But it was still gone, and I've never seen it since. When I was living in Missouri in 2012 or 13, I was feeding my chickens when they started acting very strange and ran inside their coop. I looked up, and I swear to God, I saw a pterodactyl. I watched it as it glided over my property, then my neighbors, then across the small valley, until it was completely out of sight. There's no way it could have been anything else. As plain as day, it was a pterodactyl. Very few people besides my wife and parents that I have told believe me, so I don't tend to talk to many people about it. I even started doing research on pterodactyl sightings and emailed a subject matter expert. Apparently the sightings are not as uncommon as most people think. And before I start getting blasted, I'm not a crazy person. I'm a perfectly sane 34-year-old man with no history of mental problems who has been holding down a solid career for 10.5 years. I saw a pterodactyl, and that's a fact. But I simply have no proof other than my words. When I was about 7 or 8, I was at my grandmother's house in West Virginia to spend the night, along with my brother and sister. It was a Friday night, and we were watching old school TGIF. There was a knock on the door, and I jumped up to answer it. My grandmother was in her bedroom and didn't hear it. I wasn't supposed to answer the door by myself, but I really liked to. I opened the door, and there was no one there. I stepped out, looked to the left, to the right. To the right, beside the door, my grandma kept a small table, and sitting on that table was a mandrill, one of those primates like Rafiki from Lion King. I don't remember it moving. I just saw it sitting there, staring at me. I freaked out and slammed the door. My grandma came running out, and I told her there was a monkey outside. She ran out. My brother and sister ran to the door to see the monkey. And I'll never forget when I ran out, and the table was empty. My grandma told me I shouldn't tell tall tales and not to open the door when she wasn't around. It's been over 20 years, and my brother and sister still make fun of me for seeing a monkey. I've done Google searches about Mandrill's escape from the zoo in West Virginia, but no such luck. It is still so clear in my mind. I'm sure it was there, though. This was probably about 16 years ago, so I was about 10 or 11. My parents' basement was and is unfinished. We had a small TV and a single couch in the middle of it for my siblings and I to go play games, watch VHS tapes, whatever. One night, I decided to hang out down there by myself, watch some movies. I ended up falling asleep on the couch. While asleep, I was in a dream where I was in the exact spot I was in the basement, watching TV on the couch, when something asked me, "What channel are you watching?" Still in the dream, I turn and say, "Channel 13, to a short alien sitting next to me and staring right at me. I, of course, wake up in the empty and now dark basement. I'm sure my parents came down to turn the TV off, and I'm frozen in place for a moment, until I hear something behind the couch. I sat up to turn around, hoping to God it was our dog. And there it was, the alien from the dream, rising up about 2 feet from behind the couch and walking toward me. I'm sure I let out a blood-curdling scream as I bolted upstairs and right to my parents' bedroom. Everyone, including the dog, were up there. And to this day, I believe what I saw, as crazy as it sounds. When I was a kid, I woke up in the middle of the night to my bed shaking. Normally, that would scare the crap out of me, but instead, I was just kind of annoyed. I rolled over and muttered, "Stop it." The shaking stopped immediately. Then, a male voice speaks right beside me saying, "Sorry." That's when I freaked out. I'm pretty sure my childhood house was haunted. On my previous job, when our building was still under construction, the only floors that were occupied were the 1st, 2nd, 5th, 6th, and 7th. One time I was alone inside the elevator going from the 1st to the 6th, when suddenly it stopped and opened on the 3rd floor. Normally I would just disregard it, but rumors were all over that a ghost child was playing around on the vacant floors, so I pressed the close button as fast as I could. When it closed, I heard noises like someone was tapping their fingers on the walls of the elevator. We rented a house that never felt like home. You always felt creeped out walking in there, like you were being watched. My boyfriend and our roommate both worked nights, so I would be there by myself a lot. One night I was doing my usual stuff and watching some TV before bed, when I had this overwhelming feeling all night that I should avoid the hallway and not look directly down it. It was creepy. The feeling of being watched and terrified lasted about 2 hours before I decided to suck it up and make my way to my room. I left the hallway lights on and went to bed. Just as I turned off the side table light, I heard a drawer being pulled out and hitting the stopper. I turned on the light, and nothing was out of place. This went on about 6 times before I decided I was sleeping with the light on. I curled up under the covers and waited for my boyfriend to get home. He comes rolling in about 3 a.m., laughing at me for being such a pussy, gets into bed, turns the light off, and that's when all hell broke loose. All the doors down the hallway slammed shut one by one. Then our closet doors started rattling. The sound coming from inside could only be described as total destruction. It sounded like the shelves, the pole, and everything in there were being tossed around. The boyfriend joined me under the covers, and we were both terrified. After it stopped, it took about 5 to 10 minutes to convince him to go check around the house. Nothing was out of place, and our roommate had drove 3 hours back home that night to be with his family, so we knew it wasn't him. We slept with the lights on the rest of the night and moved out soon after. I still can't even drive by that house without being creeped out. I was sitting in my room at like 11:30 p.m. Heard lots of shit downstairs. Assumed it was my mother. Heard her walk up the stairs to my room and stop. I called out to her. She didn't say anything and walked downstairs. I went down about a half hour later to find a piece of paper with the words, "You're lucky I'm scared too," on it. And a whole bunch of shit was missing. Called my mother. She still hadn't arrived home from a dinner she was at with her friends. I called the cops and locked myself in the bathroom, but I think they left when they realized I was still home. Probably the most scared I've ever been when I was hiding in the bathroom. I was sitting in our office room home alone when I was 19. I was typing a paper for one of my college classes. The office room used to be my sister's room before she moved out, so a lot of her decorations are still there. She had a photo of a mountain range, an oval-shaped mirror, and 3 different wall hangings that read faith, hope, and love. This makes 5 total things hanging on the wall in the room. Suddenly I got random chills, which happens all the time. It was pretty cold. But this time, as soon as I got the chills, everything in the room hanging on the walls suddenly fell off. This freaked me out, but it got a tiny bit worse. I got up and walked out of the room only to notice everything hanging on the wall in my house had fell, besides the television in my room, and all of the pictures in the living room and other rooms, and the trophies in my room from Little League sports, and even a stand that held candles. I didn't know what to do. I picked up all the stuff and hung it back up, which actually took around 15 or 20 minutes. Then I drove to campus to finish my paper. Never told my parents. It's also worth mentioning that this happened around noon on a Sunday in the winter. I will preface this by saying that I'm not a religious person, and I do not believe in the paranormal. That being said, it was the month of November, and I was visiting Scotland. It was cold, and I was layered in a long-sleeve shirt, sweatshirt, and a winter jacket. In the evening, my friends and I decided to go on one of those haunted walking tours that takes you through the vaults beneath the city. They are, of course, rumored to be haunted by the poor, destitute, and deplorable people who died gruesome deaths therein. One underground vault is said to house a particularly demonic spirit. It is said to be trapped within the confines of a circle of stone built by Wiccans to protect the living from its unfettered evil. While standing alongside the stone circle, my friend, who herself is Wiccan, began chanting barely intelligibly under her breath. I suddenly felt a flurry of wind at my neck. Then nails dug deeply into the flesh of my back and dragged down my body from my shoulders to my waist. I was completely frozen in fear, too shocked to scream, although I was filled with white-hot pain. I spent the rest of the tour petrified, and when we emerged from the tunnels, I ran over to the bathroom of a pub, where I pulled off all my clothes, which themselves were perfectly intact, only to see bright red marks lining the naked skin of my back. I've told my friends and family the story, and they think it should be enough for me to cave and believe in the supernatural. I still don't, but I also cannot explain what happened in those tunnels underground. I was home alone once when my parents were out of town. We had just moved into our house, so there was an empty lot next to ours with a half-built house. My parents were the types to leave the outdoor side garage door unlocked. Dumbasses, I know. While they were gone, I was watching TV. All of a sudden, the door that leads into my garage from the inside starts to wiggle. I put my TV on mute and listen again. I see it actually move that time. I start freaking out, and I'm kind of in shock looking for the phone. Can't find the house phone. Search for my cell. Remembered I left my charger in my parents' car, so I'm frantically looking for the house phone. Our house was so new, my mom hadn't even put blinds or drapes up in the kitchen or living room. So whoever was wiggling my garage doorknob starts banging on the windows in my living room. Again, no blinds or phone. And at that moment, I realize this guy is seeing my every move. So I shoot upstairs. Again, looking frantically for the phone, and also trying to figure out how and where I jump out of my house to get away from the maniac that's outside of my house if I need to. He then starts pounding on my front door. And I can tell you at that point, he's using something metal or plastic by the sound of the thumps. I really thought he was going to shoot my door open. I remember at that moment I was pissed at myself for being a dumbass teenager that frequently talked on the phone, because I always just left it lying around, never putting it back on the base. I wanted so badly to push the button that detects where the house phone is, but I thought if he heard where it was, he'd break the window nearest and take it. It was then that I remembered I'd left the phone in my mom's room, and as I passed the hallway to her room, I see two people pacing in front of my house. I'm freaking out trying to find my dad's gun in my parents' bedroom, find the phone and call 911, and as I'm on the phone, the window breaks. I'm upstairs and scared to death, and suddenly everything goes silent. I'm waiting in my parents' pitch-black closet for what seems like an eternity. And then I hear the sirens. Cops show up, but there's no one to be found. I figured they hadn't gone too far, since it had just occurred. The cops never found my tormentors. On the plus side, the company building the house next door, same company that built ours, hired overnight security to stay on our street until the house was built, which was definitely refreshing. Sometimes a shadow is more than a shadow. Sometimes it's not. Some things can be explained by simply eliminating the obvious, like hard drugs. And others, well, we may never truly have an explanation. If you've made it this far in the video, I want you to leave 3 pumpkins in the comment section below. Thanks for watching. See you next time.